Hey everyone, Tim Muldoon back with day 19 of Ignatian mindfulness, and coming to you from Boston on a cool spring day. Thank God it is finally spring. This has been a long time coming, so always good to start the day with notes of gratitude and to actually be active in looking for things to be thankful for. It has this effect of kind of filling our minds in the ways that I talked about way back in my honey and vinegar episode. Always begin the day with gratitude, but that's not the topic for today. Instead, I'm going to talk about something a little bit more weighty, namely the meaning of life. Yes, we can do these sorts of things when we are in the midst even of pandemic. Why? Because we're confronted with the need to return to first principles, and this is certainly one of them. So here again, I want to draw from the Ignatian tradition, and specifically from Ignatius of Loyola himself, who wrote in his spiritual exercises something he calls the first principle and foundation. Now, let me get to that in just a moment. Quick, just a bit of introduction to those of you who are not familiar with Ignatius's work. He wrote a retreat guide. It's not great reading. In fact, a lot of beginners often say, well, what exactly is this? It's not a great read. I don't tend to recommend it for people that aren't well schooled in the spiritual exercises. It's just simply because he didn't write them for the average reader. It's a guide. But he does write this rather arresting beginning of it, which he describes as his first principle and foundation. And it's a statement really about the presupposition that he has about what the meaning of a human life is. And it's kind of interesting to think about in our own times. And he writes this. He says that the human being is created to praise, reverence, and serve our Lord, and by that means to save our souls. And everything else on the face of the earth is created to help us to get to that end for which we are created. Boom, full stop. I mean, that's the statement. It's rather simple. So we're created to do some good in the world. Now, here I want to take a moment and speak to those of you for whom God language is maybe still a little foreign, still a little bit, I'm not sure I want to go along with all those religious folks. Here's the idea. You don't necessarily have to know exactly what you're talking about. In fact, here I will quote Saint Augustine, who said that if you do understand it, it's not God. In other words, those of us that claim to be theologians, me, we have to say at the beginning, we don't know what we're talking about. Great way to build a resume, isn't it? But be that as it may, here's the idea. It was put best by somebody that I think just absolutely hit the nail on the head. And she was a publisher who was editing this book for an esteemed Jesuit, great thinker. And she said effectively, look, I'm not a person of faith, I'm not a believer, but the more I read this guy, the more I came to understand what he was talking about. And so she said, I started treating the word God as I treated the X in algebra. And I'm going to solve for X. I'm going to figure out what it is that this guy is talking about. And she said, effectively, I was very moved by this. And I found myself really coming to an understanding of God that I had not previously accepted. Okay, so here to me, it's just a great insight for our purposes. And again, during this period of pandemic, we're creeping back to normal, but we're still in this very unusual place. Let's solve for X. Let us all, whether we're believers or not, let us all move in the direction of saying, okay, let's just imagine that God has created me to do some good in the world. What might that be? What might I do? What good might I do in these very concrete circumstances of right now? Is it reaching out to a neighbor? Is it going to the grocery store and buying groceries for somebody that is in need? Is it caring for people that are in fragile situations? I'm thinking of the elderly who've been so disproportionately impacted by this virus. What is it that we can discover? All right. So, and here again is part of the insight. And I'm extrapolating from Ignatius in talking about it in these terms, but I think it's very much in the direction of where he was going. If I live in the direction of God, in other words, if I'm living in the direction of loving in ways that allow me to discover a purpose, a mission in my life, how might I allow that God to become known to me? That's what I mean by solving for X. So on this day, I will just say this kind of parenthetically, this would have been graduation day at the university where I teach. And I'm just kind of, carrying this sadness for my seniors. And in fact, many of the students I've taught over the recent years who would be graduating today, we'd be all wearing our finery and wishing them well. And they don't get that experience. So by the way, if you're watching, I'm thinking about you guys. But that said, one of the common things that people say at graduation is, go off and do great things in the world. We who teach at Jesuit universities are kind of fond of quoting something that it's probably not something Ignatius said, but it's attributed to him. Go and set the world aflame. Ite inflammate omnia is the Latin phrase. And the basic principle is the same. We want our young people to live into the direction of generosity, of love, of compassion, of service to others. The great mantra on every Jesuit high school, college campus is that we are trying to form men and women for and with others. And it's a beautiful sentiment, and one that all of us really in these days can be thinking about and returning to it as a first principle, even in these still very strange days. How might I love in the direction of God? How might I show compassion in the godward direction? How might I serve? And how, in doing those things, might I discover a God who is right there guiding me, very much the way that the true north guides a compass and guides a ship that is being navigated according to that compass. So, our thought for today, we have a mission. It is good to begin with gratitude and with the tenacity to say, whatever it is today that I must do to live in that direction, that is what I resolve to do. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. I'm Tim Muldoon. I will see you again next time.